So we good to go? Thank you very much. Welcome to the Right to Know Advisory Committee meeting for October 26th. This is a meeting that we called because we needed to address a remote participation policy, which will be the first item on the agenda. And then we will turn to planning and scheduling for subcommittees based on the results of a member survey on subcommittees and topics. My name is Tom Harnett. I serve as the chair of the Right to Know Advisory Committee. I represent House District 83, which is the town of Farmingdale and the city of Gardner. We have members of the committee participating in person today and also remotely. I am going to begin with introductions, calling on people that are in the AFA room in person to introduce themselves, beginning with committee member Judy Meyer.
Thank you. My name is Judy Meyer. I represent Maine's newspaper publishers.
Thank you. Eric Stout.
Eric Stout, the member with background in information technology.
Jim Campbell.
Jim Campbell from the Maine Freedom of Information Coalition, representing a group, statewide group committed to open access.
Thank you. And my Senate co-chair of Judiciary and member of the Right to Know Advisory Committee, Senator Carney.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ann Carney. I represent Senate District 29, which includes the community of South Portland, Cape Elizabeth, and a little bit of Scarborough. And as Representative Harnett said, I serve with him on the Judiciary Committee.
Thank you. And Linda Clancy.
Good morning. I'm Linda Clancy. I represent Maine Press.
Thank you. And Julie Finn.
I am Julie Finn, and I represent the Maine Judicial Branch.
Thank you. And last but not least, Suzanne Goucher.
Suzanne Goucher, representing broadcast interests.
Thank you. And with those members present, we have a quorum because this needs to be an in-person meeting today for purposes of quorum and voting, but we are joined with some advisory committee members via Zoom, and I would have them introduce themselves, beginning with Vicki Wallach.
Good morning, Vicki Wallach from Maine School Management, representing school boards and superintendents.
Thank you very much. And Jonathan Bolton.
Good morning, Jonathan Bolton, Assistant Attorney General.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I would also like to introduce our staff with whom this would not happen, and to thank the staff that set up the audio visual today, but we're joined in person by Peggy Reinsch and Anna Broom from OPLA, and also remotely by Colleen Reed McCarthy, also from OPLA, but she is back in her bunker on the other side of the complex. We're also joined by Brenda Kelty, who's the Right to Know, the Freedom of Access Ombudsman in the Attorney General's office, not a member of the advisory committee, but a vital individual in the work that we do. So if Brenda can hear me, if you could introduce yourself, I would appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Brenda Kelty. I'm the Maine Public Access Ombudsman, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much. And the first formal item on the agenda is we have a draft of a policy on remote participation that was circulated to us last week after I worked a little bit with Colleen, Peggy, and Anna, and also John Bolton from the Attorney General's office to develop a policy for discussion purposes and for public input today, so we can move forward with complying with the law that we administer or oversee. And if I could, Peggy, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to ask you to provide an overview, or Mr. Bolton or Ms. McCarthy.
We were thinking of Colleen McCarthy Reed
doing that.
Thank you. Then, Colleen, if you could provide us with an
Sure.
overview of the policy, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Everybody should have a copy of the draft policy in your packet. If you're in person, it's on the white pages, and it was shared electronically with those who are joining us remotely. But as Chair Harnett said, we looked at a number of other existing policies that have been adopted by state boards and commissions in compliance with the new law, and worked to develop this draft policy for your consideration and comment, and hopefully adoption today. But just quickly go over the sections of the remote policy that you have before you in draft form. The first part just provides an explanation of the notice that will be provided by the advisory committee to the public. Notices of meetings will be put on the advisory committee's webpage, also on the Maine legislature's calendar. And will also, the notice is required to specify the means by which the public may access the meeting. So if it's an in-person meeting, the notice will describe that. If there's a remote component, the notice will be required to provide that. It also describes the opportunity that members of the public have to sign up for an email distribution list as interested parties, and they'll also receive specific notice through that. And then the guidance just generally provides that advance notice of at least 1 week will be provided by the advisory committee unless you need to meet due to an emergency or urgent issue. The policy authorizes remote participation, but does state that in accordance with the statute, advisory committee members are expected to be physically present at advisory committee meetings, except when it's not practical for a member to attend in person. And remote participation is the qualifications for remote participation are set out in the policy. And then it also provides that only those members who are physically present may participate in the meeting unless they satisfy one of the categories for remote participation. And Section 3 of the draft policy sets forth both the circumstances under which an individual member may participate remotely, but it also provides in paragraph A authorization and discretion to the advisory committee chair to make a determination when an emergency and urgent issue arises, whether or not one or more advisory committee members may participate in a meeting from a remote location, and also provides the authorization to the advisory committee chair to declare or to determine that virtual meetings of all of the members of the advisory committee are warranted, and then authorizes that remote meeting to be scheduled. Paragraph B really tracks the statutory provisions that are in place that describe the circumstances in which physical presence of advisory committee members are not practicable. So it does describe the circumstances under which an individual advisory committee member may participate in a meeting from a remote location. It includes when the committee member has an illness or other physical or mental condition that causes the member to face significant difficulties traveling to and from a meeting, or when an advisory committee member might be contagious and pose a health risk to others if they attended in person. It also includes when there's a reasonable chance that the advisory committee members' health or safety would be compromised if they attend a meeting in person. It describes circumstances in which someone is out of state and will have difficulties traveling and being at the meeting in person. It also includes travel time and recognizes that when the time for an advisory committee member to travel to a meeting exceeds 60 minutes, may be a circumstance when it's not practical for someone to attend a meeting in person, when their residence is on an island, not connected to the mainland by a bridge, when events or occurrences out of the control of the advisory committee member, or the effects of such events or circumstances make travel difficult or not practicable. That would include sort of storms, other sort of family issues or emergencies that might arise related to childcare or otherwise. And then lastly, the circumstance that I described just a few minutes ago, when there's an emergency or urgent issue, the advisory committee chair requires the committee to meet remotely. There is a responsibility on the advisory committee members individually to notify the advisory committee staff as soon as possible if it's not practicable for them to attend a meeting in person. If the advisory committee chair makes a determination that an emergency exists so that the full committee must meet remotely, the chair has the responsibility to notify staff as soon as possible, so members of the committee and also members of the public can be notified. It describes the form of remote participation, that the meeting would be scheduled using a platform like Zoom. For today's meeting, that will provide both audio and video reception for all participants, and access that's provided to advisory committee members will be the same access provided to the public to participate in the meeting. It does describe that if an advisory committee member participates remotely, it's their responsibility to have the technology to access the meeting remotely, and also to maintain decorum to the same extent that they would if they were attending physically present at a meeting. And then lastly, it does describe, which is consistent with the statute, that members who participate remotely in accordance with the policy are present for purposes of a quorum and voting if it's authorized. It does just require that if one or more members of the advisory committee is participating remotely, that then it would require that the advisory committee takes any votes by roll call that can be seen and heard by members of the committee and by the public. And then I would point out also the policy describes the responsibilities of making documents available to both committee members and the public that are attending remotely to the same extent that they would be provided to committee members and the public attending the meeting in person, so long as no additional costs are incurred. And then the last section of the policy just describes the intent that the policy would make meetings as accessible as possible to members of the public. If someone, and that the advisory committee will provide reasonable accommodations to allow members of the public with disabilities to access the meeting. And it does ask that if someone needs a particular accommodation, that they request that accommodation by contacting staff, and it provides the contact information. As I said, this is really consistent with a lot of the other policies that we saw that have been adopted by other agencies and commissions. I would note that we did get one comment from one of the members who can't attend today. Chris Parr suggested that the circumstance describing when a committee member it may not be practicable for a committee member to attend a meeting because traveling to the meeting exceeds 60 minutes. He suggested that the advisory committee might want to consider also adding a mileage threshold as well, 60 minutes or 60 miles. We have seen other policies that have included both reference to travel time and also to the mileage that it would require someone to travel from their home. So other than that, we have not received any comments in writing or suggestions from advisory committee members.
Thank you very much, Colleen, and thank you for that overview. And just to summarize really briefly, the high points is that this hits the statutory default that in-person meetings are preferred and are the norm, but then does two things. It provides exceptions to be granted by the chair regarding individual members' absence and sets out the criteria for that, but also in extreme situations in subparagraph B7 allows for the chair to call a fully remote meeting due to an emergency situation. The default is that when we meet in person, there is always a location for the public to attend. But when we are meeting hybrid or fully remotely, there needs to be an avenue for remote participation by all members of the public. So again, thank you for that overview. And I know that AAG Bolton has worked on these issues and this policy in particular. Is there anything you'd like to add, AAG Bolton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say first, I think this is really an excellent job by commission staff. I think this is an excellent policy and really I think hits all the things it needs to hit and provides a lot of guidance to the members of the commission and to the public. I do actually have a suggestion, which I didn't provide in advance because it didn't occur to me until I realized at 4:45 yesterday that I would not be able to attend in person because I was screened out under the screening checklist that we were all sent. And so my suggestion is that given that my understanding is the commission is going to be meeting in the legislature that's going to be subject to the screening checklist, and because that screening checklist, I think bars attendance in situations that are a little broader than what's in B1. So for instance, people who are in a household with somebody who's quarantining are prohibited from attending. And I believe if you've had close contact with somebody who's had COVID, you can't attend in person. So my one suggestion would be expanding B1 to make it clear that if you can't pass the self-screening checklist that's applicable, and this could be done in general language in case there's a different location for some of these meetings, but you can't pass that screening checklist, that you can participate remotely as well.
Thank you, John. And I realize you came up with this at 4:45 yesterday, but I'm curious if you might have any, our hope is to adopt something today. If
I
you
do
might
have
language.
So I did jot something down, which would just be at the end of one, after person, right after the word person, you could add comma, or that does not satisfy any self-screening health requirements applicable to the noticed meeting location.
Did you get that, Peggy and Colleen? Thank you very much for that suggestion and for your comments in general. Yes.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to raise a quick question. Do we
Sure.
even need the words self-screening in there? Because I'm just thinking about in this particular case, the screening requirements and other things may morph over time. And if we omitted the word self-screening, it would just broaden it enough to cover whatever might happen over the next 12 months.
So whatever policy might be in place.
Yeah.
Rather than limited to self-screening. Are you comfortable with that, Jonathan?
Yes, so it would be does not satisfy any health requirements applicable to the notice meeting location. Just trying to think, there might be a slightly better way to say it than health requirements. Would it work to say, just say, instead of if it's the self that's the issue, it could potentially just be any health screening requirements. I'm not sure if that satisfies the concern, but health requirements might be a little ambiguous, I guess, is my only concern.
Okay, so perhaps health and safety screening requirements.
Something like that, yeah, that would work fine.
Senator Carney?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. And I would say health or safety.
Okay.
Thanks.
Make sure it's not conjunction. Thank you. And with that, I would now open it up to committee members to see if they have any comments or issues they want to discuss regarding the proposed policy. And if you could raise your hands to let me know, I will call on you as I see you, starting with Judy Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to my understanding, we're expected to be here in person, but a remote meeting will always be ready to go in case B1 through 6 is applicable to anybody on the morning of the meeting.
That is correct.
Okay. And would they,
Or 7 if the entire meeting
7,
is going to be
right.
remote.
but would they have to let staff know and get clearance from you as chair before participating, or is it just presumed they will participate if they meet anything in B?
I believe under section 3A, the chair determines if they have met the criteria to
Okay,
meet remotely.
okay, thank you very much.
Julie, Finn,
Yes, sort of following up on Judy's question. And I haven't seen any other policies, and I have to admit, I'm not terribly familiar with the authorizing legislation. But there's no, none of the listed reasons could be, the convenience of the committee member, I'm noticing. And I just say that, all of us at this table are busy sometimes, and maybe we have this meeting at 10 and another meeting at 12. And because of travel or whatever, it just makes it difficult to attend both if you have to be in person. So I guess maybe this is a question for the AG, but so you have to attend unless you are sick or one of these other criteria apply. That seems to me what it says, and I don't know if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, that's how this reads. The way that the legal requirement is that the policy has to provide that everyone has to attend unless it's not practicable for them to attend. And then the statute then provides 4 examples of situations that aren't where it wouldn't be practicable to attend, which are basically what you see in B, plus there's some additional things in B. So the statute does provide some leeway for boards and commissions and bodies to identify other situations where they think it would also be not practicable for a member to attend. So that is something where there's flexibility, but the standard is ultimately this practicability standard. So I think the committee would have to be persuaded that whatever, if we were going to adopt section 8 to be, the committee would have to be persuaded that that is truly a situation where it's not practicable for the person to attend.
Okay.
is that something you are suggesting to add to the policy, Julie?
Well, I'm just thinking kind of in real terms about, how this might play out. And here's another question. So if one person meets one of these conditions of practicability and the meeting thus is going to have a remote element, would then it be something that, I guess it's up to the chair to allow another member to attend remotely because of a reason that's more of convenience?
My concern would be to have an exception that just swallows the entire rule, and the statute, regardless of, there was a division in support on the statute. The statute's pretty clear on the default being in-person participation. I understand the practical side of it, but I'm worried about sort of having just an omnibus exception to unwrite the law.
Okay, all right, thank you. Although I do have to just mention this, 60 minutes and 60 miles is sort of the same thing if you're on the highway, which is pretty much exactly my distance. So I actually have no idea how that would play, but it's a little arbitrary, but I guess it makes sense as well as any other number.
Yeah. And the number that had originally been suggested was higher, and any number is arbitrary, and I suggested the lower number. And I'm also comfortable with putting 60 minutes or 60 miles in driving distance as recommended by member Parr, Chris Parr.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding this properly.
And maybe you can move your car just a little further, further south when we're meeting, or whatever the direction would be. Are there other comments from committee members present? Or can we take comments from those participating remotely today when we don't have a remote policy in place yet?
I guess it depends what your definition of participation is. They obviously couldn't vote
But they could participate as a member of the public.
as a member of right.
Okay.
And we actually don't have, although I think one person signed up or got a registration, there's nobody, no members of the public that are
Okay.
attending remotely, other than the members of your commission that right.
Are there comments or any discussion from members of the committee attending as public members remotely today? If so, if you could just raise your physical hand and I can call on you. AAG Bolton.
I just wanted to follow up, Mr. Chair, on your point about the 60 minutes or 60 miles. I just wanted to point out that if that is adopted, and I don't see any issue with that, but it should just specify whether it's the lesser of or the greater of.
Right. And I was struggling with exactly how to say that because I assume it's the lesser of. Eric.
So not to quibble, but on that, it does say travel to a meeting. So could someone interpret that? It says my travel time to and from round trip is, because in my case, it's 35 minutes one way. In good weather, good traffic. So I don't know if that needs to be clarified, that it's meant to be, or is it meant to be one way or just total travel time? Sounds kind of nitpicky, but
No, I assumed it was one way. If we need words to that effect, then.
I think we agree that it was intended to be one-way travel time. And if you want us to clarify that, we can certainly do that.
Would that be as simple as perhaps putting the words one way after committee member to travel? Okay.
Sure.
Was there anything else, Jonathan?
No, I didn't have anything else. I think adding one way is, we'll clarify that to the extent it's necessary.
Okay. Are there other items for discussion? Linda.
Are these meetings, are they still going to be broadcast, recorded via YouTube as well?
I don't know if we're still, I mean, we didn't used to do that before we were doing any kind of remote participation. They were broadcast on the legislature's audio website, and those are archived. So you can go back and listen to them, but you wouldn't be able to go back and watch them. So I don't know that I don't know what the legislature's policy is, and we work for the legislature, so I'm not sure going forward what that would mean for a meeting where everybody is in person. You do not have a remote participation piece. I don't think we would be set up to do Zoom. I'm also actually a little bit wondering what we're going to do in the situation where we expect an all in-person meeting and we get notice from somebody that morning that they're not going to be able to participate for, they meet one of those reasons, how quickly we can scramble to put that into place. Right now, this is our only facility for doing hybrid meetings. But, I think we're working on it.
Are there other items for discussion? Eric,
I'm wondering at the end of the discussion, are we going to make a motion to incorporate what we just?
I'm going to
Yeah, okay.
run through all those changes. Hopefully, all of them. Senator Carney.
A comment on the 60 minutes and 60 miles. I think one nice thing about having the 60 minutes is that for example, in inclement weather, 40-minute drive could easily become a 60-minute drive. And so letting people make that judgment call is, I think, a nice thing about at least having a minute time frame.
Thank you. You know, and I also will just add, I think that as with all new policies, this is something we're going to have to work with and tinker with if necessary. I'm thinking now, you know, when you start talking about inclement weather, that often doesn't come with 7 days notice about how we're going to have a meeting and conduct a meeting, and knowing that this room is right now the only room, I think, in the legislature where you can have a hybrid meeting. There will be some challenges, I think, and it excuses the member from participating. But if we allow remote participation by a member, then we have to allow remote participation by the public, and that might be hard to arrange on short notice. I'm just thinking out loud. So let's,
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just one point on that. One of my clients, you know, the way they thought about the same issue, and they addressed it by just deciding that every meeting was going to have a remote component, regardless of whether they thought everyone was going to be able to participate in person or not. And it always gets broadcast to YouTube. And I realized that there might be, you know, technological equipment reasons why that is challenging, but that's kind of the simplest solution to that problem if it's logistically feasible.
But there are two types of remote participation. I mean, there's remote observation, which we could set up with a YouTube channel without having a hybrid like we have today. But are you saying those entities are going to ensure that members of the public not only can observe, but can actively participate, be heard, question, et cetera?
Right. And I mean, in the case of this particular client, it's usually, there's not usually a general right to sort of participate. So you know in advance sort of who from the public is going to be participating, and that can be set up. But even in situations where, you know, everyone's going to be there in person and there's nobody is participating remotely, they just broadcast it. So there's remote attendance is possible.
Which can be accomplished with the legislative feed, the legislative audio feed, right? Okay.
True.
Any other discussion? Jim?
Yeah, I think that the concern about technology is a real one, but on the other hand, there's a lot more flexibility now than there used to be. And so, for example, if everyone on the committee brought their laptop, then using Zoom is nothing or something like it. And you could very easily have an opportunity for people, the public who wanted to participate, to call in by phone to make a comment that everybody could hear. So I don't think that having only one room set up for this is necessarily as restrictive now as it might have been 2 years ago.
And I know we're getting a bit far afield of what our charge is today, but I've heard from municipalities that are concerned with the new law that it is very difficult for them to establish hybrid meetings. And that might be the subject of legislation in the short session, because they got very used to that. So where I see us and would like us to move forward is I would entertain a motion to adopt the draft policy as drafted with 3 changes. Those changes being the first on page 1, section 3B1, to add after that 4th line, advisory committee member attendance in person. And then we had proposed language regarding health policies. Is that something you could read to us? Thank you.
Right, so the language I have at the end of B1, instead of the semicolon, it would be a comma after person or that does not satisfy any health or safety screening requirements applicable to the notice meeting location.
Okay, that would be the first change. And then the next 2 changes I had were both to, I'm sorry, yes. Sure. You can make the comment.
Yeah, I would just say instead of that, make it who. Just to be grammatically.
Grammar is important. Do you have that, Peggy?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. And then the next were 2 changes to, on page 2, section 3, paragraph B4, which was to insert the word one way in between travel and to a meeting. And also add at the end of that line after 60 minutes or 60 miles in driving distance, whichever is, it's really hard to compare minutes to miles, but you want it to be either or.
Right. So I think it reads exceeds the lesser of 60 minutes or 60 miles.
Okay,
Is that what you intended?
I think it is. And did I miss any other changes?
That's all I have.
So I would entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, should we do a roll call vote of those present? Or,
I think that makes sense.
okay,
Did you want me to call the roll?
that would be wonderful.
All right.
Thank you.
Judy Meyer,
Yes.
Eric Stout,
Yes.
Jim Campbell,
Yes.
Senator Carney,
Yes.
Representative Harnett,
Yes.
Suzanne Goucher,
Yes.
Julie Finn,
Yes.
Linda Clancy.
Yes.
Get everybody? That's all that, so that is 8 voting in favor of the motion.
Okay, so the motion carries, the rule policy is adopted. Thank you very much to Peggy, Anna, Colleen, and John for their assistance and for everybody working through this policy today. Second, the next item on the agenda is the planning and scheduling for subcommittees, which will discuss the result of the member survey on subcommittees and topics, which I believe is the blue sheet. Is the first thing I want to say is thank you to all committee members, because we have had no problem getting people to agree to participate on all of the subcommittees that we have, and I greatly appreciate your willingness to do so. At some point before we leave, we will need to select or hopefully have a volunteer to chair all of those subcommittees, and that is really just to be able to work with staff about scheduling subcommittee meetings. But before doing that, do you want to run through what you provided with us on the blue sheet Or
Sure.
is that a Peggy or?
Yes, I
Colleen
can
or
do that.
Anna?
I know Colleen, I was out last week, so Colleen carried all the duties that we would have split. But she and Anna also have a meeting, another meeting coming up. So you want me to just go ahead, Colleen, so you can, okay. And I know Anna's leaving
Yes,
now.
please. I'm going to drop off in a minute, so
Okay.
I have an 11 o'clock. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you for all your work. So we asked, these were the issues that came up during the meeting. Was it just last week? 2 weeks ago? And we had suggested subcommittees on public records exceptions, remote participation, technology, and we kind of had the other issue of fee waivers, and we talked about whether that should be a separate subcommittee. And so the survey went out and 11 people who responded, everybody that responded said, do the fee waivers as a full advisory committee topic. So that's easy enough to do. And then you can see in the bottom chart shows the interest in going forward with the specific issues in each of these subcommittees. And you'll see that in particular, the broad categories of exceptions to the Freedom of Access Act, rather than going into each statute with regard to proprietary information or maybe language about aggregate information being public as long as it's not personally identifiable. That is something that only got 6 members to support. One as a subcommittee, one said do it as a full committee, and somebody else said maybe this can wait till next year. And you'll also see that the issue about list management tools, which is not my terminology, I think we got that from Eric in particular, the accessibility of off system records, that got kind of a lower support of taking that on this year. That doesn't mean it's not, people aren't interested in doing it. It's just not as much support to do it this year. And everything else, maybe participation in public proceedings by people who are residents of correctional facilities got a little bit lower support than most of the others. So it looks like, and people really stepped up, as you said, to offer their services on subcommittees. So I'm not sure how you want to proceed. It does look like it makes sense to break it down into 3 separate subcommittees that will meet between full advisory committee meetings. We might have an opportunity for 1 or 2 to meet the same day, because I think all the meetings are scheduled for 1 o'clock, right? So morning meetings would be possible. My understanding is that subcommittees would be required to comply with the remote meeting policy. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Peggy, and also for the help from Colleen and Anna. And I would note that even those items that had lower numbers, they still had a majority of all of the persons that responded, sometimes just a slim majority. But I think that given that, rather than micromanage the subcommittees, it can be up to the subcommittees to determine what they can focus on in the limited amount of time they have before the next session. And I would add that the unanimity of the full advisory committee discussing fee waivers just means that we put that on a future agenda item so it can be discussed. So before moving on to looking for volunteers to chair these subcommittees, are there any items that come to mind by committee members that they'd like to raise here or discuss about what Peggy just reported to us? You're also agreeable. Thank you. Appreciate it. To start this volunteer process moving forward, I would be happy to chair the remote participation subcommittee unless there is somebody who's volunteered to do that that has a burning desire to chair? Seeing none, I guess the default position is I will chair that. I would now ask if there are any members here on the Public Record Exception Subcommittee who would be willing to chair that, recognizing again that chairing is not really taking charge as much as working with staff about scheduling meetings and what items will be on that meeting agenda. So is there anybody on that who volunteered for that committee who would be interested in doing that?
Tom, I'll just say I could chair, but I suspect Chris Parr wouldn't mind sharing.
You know, Chris has chaired this in the past.
Yes, he has.
There is something, oh, I don't know, that feels a little unfair just picking him since he's not here.
I
But
thought that was the way things worked.
that is what happens. So that's why you drove so fast to get here, even though it was a little late. So I will recognize Chris's legacy to chairing this subcommittee and suggest that he chair with the backup position, that if not, that Julie Finn would be willing to do that.
I could do it, yes.
Okay. That give you what you need, Peggy?
It does, thank you.
And the technology subcommittee, is there a person who would be interested in chairing that? Perhaps the person who suggested creating that committee? Would that be Eric?
I'm actually better at following somebody else's lead. That's why my name is listed last, but I certainly would fully participate. But
Okay,
I think I would decline. I think it'd be better for somebody with more of a policy focus
Okay.
and I can support that, if that makes sense. to
I
the
think
committee.
I will just point out, I think you're last because of the alphabetical order of things, but that's,
Oh, I've always thought that I was last for other reasons all my life.
we'll just put an A in front of your name. Are there other members of the technology committee that would be interested in help chairing that? That would be Judy Meyer.
I would be happy to chair.
Thank you very much. And you have a dedicated follower
I will
just
lean on Eric.
to your
Yes.
to your left.
And my apologies, I have to duck out for a couple of minutes, but I'll be back.
Do we need to do anything formally on this? Peggy?
No, I think that's good enough, and we will be in touch with all the chairs and backup chairs to find meeting dates. If you're, as we said, if we're going to do a hybrid meeting, we really have to wedge it into a very full schedule for this room.
Okay.
If you're going to do an in-person meeting, it's much more, we have much more flexibility for scheduling.
Okay.
But if it's in the state, any legislative space, we will still need to do the screening and the masks until that policy changes.
Okay. Thank you. So that's how we will proceed with the subcommittees. That is all that I have on my, I forgot to identify the agenda buff. I know how you guys are so particular about your colors. Unless there is anything that a member of the committee, either here or participating as a member of the public, has to raise, I would entertain a motion to adjourn with my thanks for everybody making it down here today for this meeting. So we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Jim Campbell, seconded. Seconded by Suzanne Goucher. All those in favor, any discussion? All those in favor? Please record a unanimous vote. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Peggy, Colleen, and Anna, for all of your help, and AAG Bolton as well. Thank you. See
Thank
you
you.
all sooner than you might like. Take care.